And a hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 83 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you for joining me here on this pleasant Friday night in New York. If you're checking out episode 83 on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you're catching up with this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. So in a previous episode, I had talked about Hollywood's greatest directors, and it was a kind of poll that the social media page called Puberty put together, and I found it very interesting, with the exception of the person that I would have as my number one wasn't on the list. They didn't have Orson Welles on the list. They didn't have Stanley Kubrick on the list. Most importantly, they did not have Sir Alfred Hitchcock. I guess Kubrick was as far back as they wanted to go because he was still active when he passed in the late 1990s. And many of contemporary filmmakers such as Spielberg knew him personally. And everyone else from Tarantino to Christopher Nolan has been influenced him in some way or other, and especially Nolan. It's all over his work, how big of a Kubrick fan he is. And Tarantino's kind of gone back and forth. There are certain Kubrick films. He's always a little bit of an outlier. Like Tarantino's favorite Indiana Jones film is Temple of Doom. The one that Spielberg says, geez, I really don't like that one. And Tarantino's like, what are you talking about? That's the best one. I don't like Last Crusade. Yeah, but that's my favorite one. Well, you're wrong. You know, that kind of thing. But the way that I would classify, when I say best, it's all subjective. We know this. But to be precise, you ask me the question, who is the most pioneering in their techniques, their craft? Who is the most inventive, which is not exactly the same as pioneering, but just had ideas that maybe no one had thought of? Because Orson Welles, pioneering, inventive, influential, for sure. You could easily argue that Welles is the answer to this question. The problem is Welles' output isn't there. His career got fucked. He was screwed over repeatedly. He didn't get to do what he would have done had he, let's say, started in England and then moved to the United States after getting himself to a point where even a David O. Selznick wasn't going to fuck with him that much because he was producing material and movies that people loved. What separates Alfred Hitchcock from everyone else is his pure output. So you could say among contemporary filmmakers, and you wouldn't be wrong if you said Stanley Kubrick is more influential to filmmakers who have begun working, let's say, in the last 4 decades. 100% agree. But when you take it all into account, Hitchcock's the man. He, in my opinion, has produced the highest number, or produced, not has, he's been gone for more than 40 years. He produced the greatest number of movies that could easily be called masterpieces. More so than Scorsese, who's turned out a lot. More so even than Spielberg. And Hitchcock had a 4-movie run that will never be equaled. And it came in sort of the late middle of his career, from 1958 to 63. And he was also working on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which was a very successful TV show. And the TV show, I would assume, helped his kind of visibility in the day before social media, before it was even called media, it was just press. It helped that he was there, that he would introduce episodes. It kept him in the public consciousness in the days when it was easy to forget about somebody. Hitchcock is somebody who began in the silent period and hit his glory days in the first decade of sound, start of the glory days. And just so you're aware, there are numerous famous filmmakers you probably heard of if you're a movie fan that you maybe didn't realize, oh, they began in the silent period. I'll just throw some names at you. Cecil B. DeMille, Fritz Lang, John Ford, Howard Hawks. I mean, these are huge names. And Alfred Hitchcock made a number of silent films in England and continued to work in England, making some classic films of the 30s before coming to the United States. He was recruited courted, whatever word you want to use. And not everybody comes when Hollywood wants them. And this is something you could Google, going back decades. Pedro Almodovar, the phenomenal Spanish filmmaker. Hollywood has been so desperate to get him here. He's comfortable doing what he was doing. Not everybody wants to work in Hollywood. Guillermo del Toro, on the other hand, this was his dream, and he's fulfilled it beyond anyone's expectation from, the beginning of Del Toro's career. You go back to films like Kronos and even Mimic, where he said, Harvey Weinstein kind of fucked me on that one. But I saw Mimic, and I thought it was very, very solid, for what it tries to do, a little sci-fi horror. But Hitchcock made silent films, they're actually really good. They still play. You can see the kind of evil genius at work that he was behind the camera. And I would say that for a contemporary audience, because he did the original version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, it's okay. It's all right. I actually prefer the James Stewart Doris Day remake in '56, and so did he, ironically, although generally speaking, most critics don't. But for my money, 39 Steps is terrific. The best movie that Alfred Hitchcock made in the '30s, the most accessible to contemporary audiences, The Lady Vanishes, which almost literally was remade by Jodie Foster, Sean Bean, and the production team and studio behind the movie Flight Plan, which was a hit and is a good movie, but it's basically a remake of The Lady Vanishes. Only in Flight Plan, it's a little girl. And it's a good movie. It fucks with your head. In a similar vein to another actress that I really love, Julianne Moore, when she did a movie called The Forgotten, which also has elements of that, where, let's say you're a mom, you have a daughter, you have a son. In the case of Jodie in Flight Plan, she's traveling with her daughter, and the daughter disappears, and everyone on the plane says, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You've been here alone all this time. I think you've lost your mind, lady. And The Forgotten gets into similar elements. Hitchcock made movies in the '40s that are more highly regarded than my professional opinion, I believe, is warranted. There are numerous critics that have Shadow of a Doubt, the great Joseph Cotten. He of Citizen Kane had just made that with Orson Welles. And Teresa Wright, who later worked with Francis Coppola in The Rainmaker in 1997, the same Teresa Wright, 55 years later. It's fucking great. I love when people who were young, and then a lot of times you don't realize, okay, this was somebody famous, like Gloria Stewart in Titanic. She's 90 years old, however old she was supposed to be. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, I know her. She was in James Wells' The Old Dark House in 1932. Here we are 65 years later. Love that. Teresa Wright and her beloved Uncle Charlie in Shadow of a Doubt. Shadow of a Doubt is a good movie. I don't have it in Hitchcock's top 5. It's good. Don't love it. And I feel the same about Notorious. As much as I adore, and there are many people, Roger Ebert always said that was his number one Alfred Hitchcock film, Notorious. His second time, Hitchcock that is, working with Cary Grant. First time was a movie Suspicion. Also not a great movie. It's a movie that should be better than it is. It's about a young wife who falls in love with a kind of a not such a great guy. He's got debts, and maybe he's trying to take advantage of her money, or maybe he's going to bump her off. It probably would have been better if they allowed Cary Grant to kill his movie wife, but the studio said, we can't have our charming Cary bump off Joan Fontaine, you stupid. So the movie kind of soft pedals away, and Cary plays menace really well in that film. Just okay. So that's 3 movies that are very highly acclaimed from the '40s. They're okay. Nothing special. And to kind of fast forward a little bit to Hitchcock's real pure glory period. Because as I said, you get into the '50s, there are plenty of people that absolutely love Strangers on a Train, which was remade loosely by Danny DeVito, Billy Crystal, as Throw Mama from the Train, which is, I think the movie is fucking riot. I mean, DeVito is a scream in that film. Strangers on a Train it's good. I don't have it in my top 5. Would it be in the top 10? Maybe. But there are those that would easily have that in their top 5. Absolutely love it. Now, in terms of, I mentioned the inventiveness and pioneering and doing different things that maybe other filmmakers hadn't even thought were possible, because Orson Welles sure as fuck did that in Citizen Kane. He and his cinematographer, Greg Toland, they figured out things with the camera, the frame rate, and how to adjust the lens. Like, what the fuck is he doing? You can't do that. Yeah, he just did it. That's Orson Welles. Yeah, he just did it. But with Hitchcock, he made this movie with James Stewart, another all-timer that Hitchcock worked with frequently. He made this movie called Rope, which comes across like a stage play. It's not really that exciting, but it's about two very fucked up sociopathic intellectuals who decide, almost as a kind of parlor trick, they're going to murder one of their classmates, and they're going to put the body in a room that they're having a gathering, see if anybody figures out what's going on. Concept is beyond fucked up. But what Hitchcock did with this film was he decided to, tell me if this sounds familiar, current TV, he tried to make it appear as if the film was shot in real time. That, like the TV show 24, each episode is 1 hour in the day, a very long day of Jack Bauer, the Kiefer Sutherland character, the main character of the show 24. And then there was a film called Nick of Time with Johnny Depp in the mid-90s, which is kind of underrated if you look at Depp's filmography. I think it's a solid little thriller, where that's also taking place in real time. Where you say to yourself, okay, I know the movie is 93 minutes, and we're 82 minutes in, that they got to wrap this up soon. The movie Rope, Hitchcock wanted it to appear as if the entire film was shot in one continuous take, as if he had an hour and 40 minutes of film in the camera at once. Now, obviously, that's null set. That doesn't exist. That doesn't exist now. It didn't exist then. But he was able to edit it and cut and frame and use, again, tricks that somebody like him would know how to do. If you don't know that he's cutting every 10 minutes, you might watch that movie and say, I don't understand. There's no editing here. It's one take. What the fuck? He figured it out. And the movie as a whole is not entirely successful, but as an experiment, as a razzle-dazzle, this guy is really good. Where did he even get the idea to try this in the first place? Nobody ever attempted anything like this. How did he think? Like, he had the chutzpah to say, I can do it. Fuck it. And he did it. Another movie I remember my dad showed me. It may have been the first Hitchcock film I was exposed to. As I've said, I grew up a few blocks from a very early video store before there was Blockbuster. In Massapequa, for those of you familiar with the South Shore of Long Island, there's a famous hamburger stand called All American, which is just off Merrick Road. I think that's Route 27A. But just off Merrick Road and where Route 107 ends. It ends at Merrick Road. The video store called South Shore Video was diagonally across the street from the All-American hamburger stand. You could literally see the South Shore Video. It's about 300, 400 feet that way. And in the early days of VHS, my dad, who was never this kind of personality, he was an accountant. He was a CPA, probably on the autism spectrum, probably definitely neurodivergent. I was never told I was on the autism spectrum, didn't really test for it back then. But my dad's brain worked differently than the average person, even the average smart person. You could say the same about me, but if you want to throw away what I said about smart person, I don't give a shit. Dad was not somebody to ever be giddy as a schoolboy, to use a quote from the third Indiana Jones film. Giddy as a schoolboy. But when we first got VCR player, VHS, right after my sister was born, I won't say the year, Jess, he was like a kid in a candy store. Just as he had told me the previous decade in the 70s, he was the first person he knew to get HBO, to get cable. He thought it was the greatest thing ever. And being able to rent movies, being able to watch movies uncut on HBO, Cinemax, wow, that was something he was really excited about and always loved. But once we got got the VHS, video store was so close, 2 minutes tops by car, start renting movies. And I believe the first Alfred Hitchcock film I saw was Dial M for Murder, which was also remade. See, the fact that Hollywood continues to remake Hitchcock should give you an idea of how in the level of esteem that he was held and continues to be held. Dial M for Murder was remade by Andrew Davis, who had done The Fugitive, with Michael Douglas and Gwyneth Paltrow and a young Viggo Mortensen. We're in love, sir. And then it's such a great scene when Viggo Mortensen thinks he's going to reason with Michael Douglas, and Michael Douglas just looks like he's going to crush this guy like a fucking ant. But yes, A Perfect Murder is basically a remake of Dial M for Murder. I really liked it at the time. I didn't know where it was going. I thought, oh, she's going to get convicted and she's screwed and all of this stuff. Film really took me by surprise. That was the first Hitchcock movie that I saw, Dial M for Murder. There is a lot of debate because to me, there's 4 Hitchcock films. You can flip a coin. You say, which is the best? And I've argued and will say that Quentin Tarantino, to me, his Holy Trinity, Martin Scorsese's Holy Trinity, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Taxi Driver. Quentin Tarantino, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill. I think Kill Bill is on par with both of those movies. I know a lot of people say, well, it's not as good as Django. It's not as good as maybe Hateful Eight or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Hey, it's all opinion here, right? You can tell me that the best Scorsese film, as 3 of the professors at New York University, The Age of Innocence, Joe McElhenney, he made us watch it twice in a row. He said, nobody really grasps. There's just a couple of scholars that figured out how great this movie really is. Just as people thought Alfred Hitchcock made light entertainment. They didn't start to see the deeper themes until film critics and theoreticians like Robin Wood and Noel Carroll got into it and said, actually, this guy's a fucking genius. He may be twisted as fuck, but he's doing things in these movies that you didn't even get. Doing that, dastardly. But Hitchcock's best films, generally speaking, without putting them into any kind of order right now, Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho. Some people put The Birds in there, other people Strangers on a Train, still others Lady Vanishes, perhaps The Original Man Who Knew Too Much. There's so much greatness to choose from. And it doesn't even matter if you don't have a favorite or if you can't classify what's the best versus what's your favorite. I mean, I went a really long time. I had never seen The Wrong Man with an actor I love, Henry Fonda. And even that's a great movie. It's not on the level of the other Wrong Man movies such as North by Northwest or, 39 Steps, Foreign Correspondent. Hitchcock made the same kind of movie, Wrong Man stuff. He was obsessed with people being wrongfully accused because the story goes, it's such an incredible story, but it kind of fits. There are apocryphal stories of public figures and famous figures that I think are not really true. But the Alfred Hitchcock apocryphal story is that when he was a 5-year-old boy, his father was away at work and his sister, I guess, was watching him. And the sister stole a couple of cookies. The father had bought some cookies and put them in a big jar, at a decent height. And when the father came home and he said, he wasn't even mad. He said, hey, from what we know, talk to the sister. Who had the cookies? She had the cookies. She said Al had them. And Al protested his innocence. He's a 5-year-old little boy. It's 1905, 1904, somewhere near Liverpool, presumably. Protests his innocence. Father doesn't believe him. No matter what he says, how can he prove he didn't do it? He's a roly-poly little kid. Father took young Al to the local sheriff's office. And they put him in a cell. And that budding genius started imagining things. What do you do if this happens? And he became obsessed with the idea of people being wrongfully accused. It doesn't have to be going to jail, as in the case of The Wrong Man, where, spoiler alert, 70 years later, almost, spoiler alert, Henry Fonda simply looks like the guy who committed the crime. But he was the wrong man. But that's a movie that I didn't get to until later, that I didn't see probably until I was well into my 20s. So the answer to the question, what is my favorite Alfred Hitchcock film? It's North by Northwest. Because when I say favorite, what's the one that I can watch time and again and never get bored? North by Northwest. If you ask me what is Hitchcock's best film? I mean, I know the critics say Vertigo, and that Vertigo is always, for decades, has finished in the top 5, like literally the Sight and Sound once every decade poll of 10 greatest movies in the history of cinema. Vertigo is either first or second or third or fourth. No, Citizen Kane doesn't get voted first anymore. For many decades and polls, Citizen Kane was number 1. I love Vertigo, but it is not an easy film to watch. It's very difficult to see James Stewart playing that kind of character. You know, we love James Stewart. Who doesn't? George Bailey, It's a Wonderful Life, right? It's tough seeing him in that role. I love Rear Window. I love North by Northwest. I love Psycho. I love Vertigo. I love The Birds. I love Rod Taylor's performance in The Birds. I mean, yeah, Tippi Hedren is nominally the lead, but I remember reading a piece by Robin Wood, the film theoretician, who got people to understand there's so much more going on in Hitchcock films than he's getting credit for. It's an outrage. Rod Taylor is pretty fucking amazing in that movie. His character, the level of guts that he shows, he's got a lot of chutzpah, a lot of courage, that guy, you know? I think I used the word chutzpah twice, now 3 times. It's too much. Sorry. I think Rear Window is actually Alfred Hitchcock's best film. Now, all of those movies still play. And by the way, Rear Window was remade, sadly, with Christopher Reeve after his accident. Because if you're not familiar, the story is that James Stewart's character, he's not a quadriplegic. He is an action photographer for kind of like if National Geographic did different type of things. He had done photo essays, and he got injured covering, I think, the Indy 500, where like a flaming tire hit him, and somehow he broke his leg. So he's stuck in a wheelchair. And in the remake with Christopher Reeve, which is, it's okay. It's not a bad movie. They don't tarnish the original, and it was great to see Christopher Reeve on screen, quite frankly. But it's not as good. It's not. I mean, how could it be? But that was another one that was remade. And Psycho was remade by Gus Van Sant, his first film, his follow-up to Good Will Hunting, which got so much acclaim. And he did a remake of Psycho with Anne Heche in the Janet Leigh role. And Vince Vaughn, creepy as fuck, in the Anthony Perkins role of Norman Bates. The movie just doesn't work. Psycho was lightning in a bottle. That's another movie which, even though the camera work and all that stuff, you don't necessarily have to say was inventive. I would say it was. It wasn't as pioneering as certain other, Hitchcock films like Vertigo, some of the special effects shots. So how the hell did he pull that off? But Psycho did change the calculus. It changed the game as far as what was allowable in Hollywood. Because another great filmmaker, Michael Powell, had his career pretty much screwed when he made a movie called Peeping Tom, which has a lot of parallels with Psycho. A lot of parallels. But Hitchcock was held in such high esteem by the film industry, he was able to get Psycho through. And it recently, like within the last year, was on Netflix and found a new generation of fans. Say, holy shit, this old movie is good. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the TV show Bates Motel. I haven't seen the show, but Psycho obviously is that's where it's from. It takes place presumably before the events of Psycho. I really like The Birds. I love Psycho. North by Northwest is the most entertaining film that he ever made. Vertigo is very difficult. And Rear Window just is extraordinary. I mean, that is a film, even though it's not as kind of light and frothy as North by Northwest, it deals with very serious shit. but it does so in such a way that it has that rewatchability factor. I would estimate I've seen Rear Window start to finish at least a dozen times. I actually watched it back-to-back nights. My very first semester at New York University, the first film screened in one of the core classes, a language of film, first week of September 1994, the first film screened was Rear Window. And me being a goody two-shoes, 20-year-old me, I watched the movie the night before class so that I would be prepared. So I actually watched the movie in 1994, the years before streaming. I watched the film twice, once on an old VHS tape and then on a huge screen with pretty good sound at the Schimmel Auditorium, Stern School of Business, lower level. They used to have a lot of the film classes there because they didn't have enough room. They didn't really have a screening room that could fit hundreds of people at the Tisch School of the Arts. The school wasn't really constructed that way. So when they would have these huge classes with a shit ton of students, they used to hold it in the Schimmel Auditorium at the Stern School of Business. So people would see me walking around the Stern School. They just assumed, what are you here for? Oh, my dad's an accountant, like that kind of thing. Now, Hitchcock continued to work through the 60s, and there are a lot of people who love the movie Marnie. It's okay. I don't love it. Sean Connery, who had already made one James Bond film, plays a kind of atypical role in there. And Tippi Hedren, who was coming off of The Birds, she's the star. She's a kleptomaniac in the film. And Bruce Dern, as he did in so many movies, plays a kind of complete nutcase, or somebody who's coming across like a complete nutcase. I remember watching the movie in the Schimmel Auditorium, and I didn't know that Bruce Dern was in the film. And when he showed up, I actually said, "Bruce Dern!" People looking at me like, shh. I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. It's Bruce Dern!" Always get excited when I see Bruce Dern. It's like Jim Carrey talked about it. Single greatest Jim Carrey impression, not Clint Eastwood, not Jack Nicholson, Bruce Dern. He does Bruce Dern so perfectly. But Bruce Dern shows up in Marnie. It's not really a comedic part, as I said, but wow. Now, I've seen, and Tarantino also has talked about the fact that, so he's not as big of a Hitchcock fan as you would expect. His feeling, and he's talked about this in different forms in various interviews, he feels that Hitchcock was the kind of guy that would have thrived if he had been born later, or not that he didn't thrive, but if he had less restriction and could have made movies exactly as Quentin himself would say, yeah, I'm allowed to make movies that push the envelope, whether it's R, whether it's NC-17. I take my shot. If I have to pull back a little, usually I don't. I tell him I did. You know how Tarantino talks a million miles a minute, and Scorsese too, with the graphic violence. The only movie that Hitchcock made that was a legitimate R-rated movie is a kind of serial killer film called Frenzy, which is good. It's not up to the level of his earlier work. Hitch was getting a little bit older and he was slowing down a little, but it's a good movie. And it gives you a tease of what he could have done if there had not been any restrictions. If we reboot The Matrix and have the rating system come out in the late 1940s, early 50s, and Hitchcock was able to make the Rear Windows, the North by Northwests, as R-rated films for adults. For adults. That's what Tarantino was talking about. Now, Hitchcock, his health declined. He didn't take great care of himself. He was overweight. He wasn't really a big exercise person, and he was a workaholic who gave everything he had to so many different movies. Now, he wasn't somebody, as we say with certain actors, they don't take any movies off. They're committed to the bit. They're committed to whatever it is they're doing. And Hitchcock worked hard on every film that he did, even the last movie, which was also with Bruce Dern, Family Plot, which I am ashamed to say I have never seen Family Plot from start to finish, just in pieces. And it's the general consensus is it's just okay. It's not the movie that you would have wanted him to kind of go out on. But then again, there are people that say, well, we wouldn't have wanted him to go out on Frenzy or Topaz or Torn Curtain, the movie that he made with Paul Newman in the 60s, which on the surface should have worked. It's a spy thriller, Cold War skullduggery. Movie never really takes flight. And the reality is when you work so much And I believe, speaking of Tarantino, this is one reason why when Tarantino says the movie that he's been working on for a really long time, I can't even imagine how much work he's put in on this script. It seems like years of work on this screenplay. He's just now getting prepared to shoot what he says will be his final film. And it seems crazy, but the reality is, if Spike Lee, he's not on the level of Tarantino, but Spike Lee is a very talented guy. He's a really good writer, and he's a fine filmmaker. Spike Lee at one point in his career was 5 for 5. The first 5 films that he made, from She's Gotta Have It through Malcolm X, they're all really good. Different ways, do different things. Not every film has to be a kind of touchstone like a Do the Right Thing or Malcolm X. But Tarantino wants to go out when he's still at his best. And he's a guy who, as we know, takes time between projects. There were teases that he was going to do a James Bond film, as Christopher Nolan has kind of been shooting down rumors that he's, getting involved. Because the Broccoli family, they would love to have, who wouldn't want Christopher Nolan to direct a movie for them? Tarantino had ideas for a Star Trek film. Boy, I wish I could have seen that. An NC-17 rated Star Trek movie. Oh. And he wrote a screenplay for an Indiana Jones film for what would have been The Crystal Skull. Or maybe it was just a story treatment. Whatever it was, he had a lot of great ideas and didn't work out. And maybe that's part of the reason why he didn't like the third Indiana Jones film, because, I would have taken it in another direction. I would have made it better, whatever. Anything would have been better than Crystal Skull. Dial of Destiny, not a masterpiece, the one that came out last summer, but very solid. Not as good as the original trilogy, but way better than Crystal Skull. M. Night Shyamalan, another guy that had some ideas for fourth Indiana Jones film. Didn't work out. We ended up getting Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. But the idea of Tarantino, if his instinct is, I got one more great movie in me, I'm going to give this, and I hope that everything comes together, and I'll retire with 10 films that reasonably, any one of the 10 could make anybody's top 5. And he could say that with a straight face and know that he's not full of shit, because he hasn't made a bad movie. Even something like The Hateful Eight, which was kind of deemed to be a little bit of a lesser work than even, a Django or an Inglourious Basterds, had plenty of people saying, bullshit, this is in his top 5. This is, what are you, nuts? This is amazing. Sam Jackson, Kurt Russell, this movie's so good. So I would argue that Hitchcock's last great film was The Birds. So the last 17 years of his life, he didn't make any great films. And Stanley Kubrick, to his credit, another guy that I would have, could easily talk about in this kind of a thing, talking about who is the greatest director of all time, or Orson Welles. In the case of Kubrick, Eyes Wide Shut is a worthy final chapter to his career. It's unfortunate that Family Plot is not a worthy final chapter to Alfred Hitchcock's career. He was working on another movie, a screenplay, I think it was called The Short Night, and it's never got made. He wasn't done with it. He still had work that he was trying to do, and I think he was 80 when he passed. And we look at Francis Coppola is now 82, and I think he's 82. He might even be older than 82. But Francis Coppola has a movie coming out he's been working on for so long. Megalopolis. I'm pretty sure he was teasing Megalopolis in the 90s. And even Francis Coppola, with all the money and resources he has, it took him this long to get it together to make this film. And God bless. And somebody like Martin Scorsese, who does take good care of himself. Yes, he had a period in his 30s and early 40s where he was dissipating himself with drugs and alcohol. But he's sober. He's been clean for decades. And he keeps working. And he's in his 80s and he doesn't stop. And Spielberg is approaching 80. I believe the beard is, 76? Going on 77 now? You just keep firing away. Doesn't stop. And he keeps producing quality work. And it's just fucking great. And George Lucas, whatever he's up to, he's doing his thing. I don't think that Lucas is active in the movie business right now, but he has companies that are still producing video games, and, he's not retired. But it does show that if you take good care of yourself, hell, Clint Eastwood, for fuck's sake. How is Clint Eastwood still working? The man's going to be 94 in 3 months. He is going to be 94, and he is in post-production on what I assume is going to be his last film. Clint, doesn't smoke, big exercise person, has always eaten a produce-heavy diet. Red meats, yes, but light on starch, produce-heavy, and he exercised and continues to exercise even at his age. And, that's it. That's what you got to do. You got to show up. You got to be able to answer the bell. And if Steven Spielberg's health hadn't been so great, he was a guy that, the kind of boyish enthusiasm, and he still seems to have it. He still seems to have that boyish enthusiasm, as does Martin Scorsese. I just watched a TikTok of Scorsese directing various scenes in Killers of the Flower Moon. He's 81 going on 82 in these, 81 for sure. In these scenes, he is like a little kid hopping around. He is so excited. And even the way that he speaks to the crew, he's respectful. Like he's not coming across like a taskmaster or somebody's bossing people around. Yeah. You want to set the camera? Perfect. All right, we're going to run it again. That's what I love to see. People doing what they love to do into their 80s. And it's unfortunate that Alfred Hitchcock wasn't able to do that. But what he was able to do was be consistently pioneering, inventive, groundbreaking, to this day influential. And Hollywood is still, even now, they're actually, and Robert Downey Jr. signed on and he's kind of joked about, oh yeah, we'll be able to do what Hitchcock did, no problem. But Downey Jr. is slated to play the James Stewart character from Vertigo. I don't have any idea how that would work. Not that he just doesn't have the talent to pull off that kind of very, very twisted character or whatever spin they would put on it now, but don't remake Vertigo, please. Oh, but it's a psychological thriller. I know, and those can be very popular if done right, but it's a sacred cow. But you know what? They did Psycho. It bombed. They redid Rear Window. It was a TV movie. Perfect Murder was a big hit. Throw Mama from the Train, a fucking riot. So who am I to say that they shouldn't keep remaking Hitchcock? But it shows the esteem that he is still held in the industry, even by executives who were not even alive when he passed, and sure as hell weren't alive when he made his last movie. Anybody mid-40s or younger in the movie business was not alive the last time Alfred Hitchcock released a film. But he is still adored and idolized, and there are probably studio executives in their 60s and 70s that can give you some of his films shot for shot. They've studied him in such exquisite detail. So, Alfred Hitchcock, in my humble opinion, New York University, class of 1997, honors graduate, cinema studies, writer, podcaster. Alfred Hitchcock, the greatest filmmaker, certainly who ever worked in Hollywood, in my humble opinion. And with that, we have reached the conclusion of episode 83 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you for joining me on another reverie, another retrospective of an all-time great who sadly has been gone for a very long time, Alfred Hitchcock. But if you've caught episode 83 on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already and are enjoying the content, don't forget to click like, subscribe, comment, turn on those notifications. Or if you caught this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 84 real soon. Have a great Friday evening.